Hello, good evening. This is Phil, and I'm doing a quick video on poetry. I started out wanting to write a long time ago, and I started relearning English grammar, punctuation, English literature, the history of English in general, and how it incorporated many different words from other languages, other cultures. And in doing so, I wrote two books, and I finished my third book that I keep on adding to until I can have it reviewed by someone and bought. To be honest, it's a hard field to get into. It's a hard field being an author and making money on it. And I refuse to do vanity again after the way I was treated by Author House with many, many typos and many, many issues with the production of the book, where it cost me more and more money to keep on polishing it after it should have been done right the first time by the publisher. And those are below the precipice and taken for granted. My book that is completed right now, that's ready for publication, if someone wants to buy it, is The Disappeared. It's 500 pages of ghost novels, novellas, short stories, some real true life stories that are short in nature, and lots of poetry. And so, doodling sometimes, I work on my poetry because it's not my best game. My best game is the long game and the novella short story game, which I love to no end doing numerous ghost stories. I love ghost stories, and I try to test myself doing shorter ghost stories, as short as possible, to give still an eerie effect. But the long game can bring out a lot of different things, psychologically speaking, about what the author wants to try to portray when he or she is writing. And so the long game is something you can kind of settle into, unless there's a deadline that needs to be made, or you have to rush it to hurry up. So in my writing, I work on doodling and doing poetry. I call it doodling when I have free time. And I think of the many different words that come out that I think of. They're in my brain, they're in my mind, and I know they're there. And I sound it out. And then I research the word because I know it directly relates to the poem I'm doing now. And being a ghost novelist, literally about ghosts, which I believe in. I don't believe in the zombie genre of writing or a lot of slasher, blood and gore. Although I can put the blood and gore in there, I believe in ghosts. I believe in giving a taste of what death is. I love the cemetery and how lonely they are. I love looking at the stones there, the obelisks, the sculptures, and some are marble, some are like soapstone, where a lot of bad weather comes in, and basically over years, decades, and centuries, those stones, those gravestones, are basically worn down, where you can't even read, who passed away when, how long ago. And you think of their history, the life that those people led. You know, were they killed? Did they die mysteriously? Did they die of something as natural or as common as consumption, whatever that was back in the day? I'm assuming like tuberculosis or something that was very common in the 1800s and turn of the century. And I think of just things that were not rectified, and that ghost is there looking at you. And that ghost is doing an investigation of their own about why this person is investigating them and their lives back in the past. So, what is that new person doing? He or she is introspecting. He or she is wondering how that person actually lived. Was it good and bad in their life? Did they go to heaven or hell? There's many different ways you can think about what a ghost is and why a ghost is there. And not all ghosts are bad. Not all ghosts wanted to move on to heaven And they're there because they weren't sent to hell necessarily, but they're in a purgatory of their own. Okay. They're in their own, perhaps, personal nirvana. Okay. In between heaven and hell. And they're just waiting there. They know where the light is going to heaven, but they feel like there's something that just needs to be done, or there's something more that they missed while they were breathing and human and right there as a human being living in the flesh, being of the world, so to speak. Is there something that they have to rectify? Is there something else that they just need to move on? Do they need a little push? Do they need the or the actual humans investigating them to tell them, yes, you can move on. You can go to that light and see heaven. There's nothing here to rectify. And after 150 years, would you be able to rectify it anyways while you're in your own purgatory trying to figure it out? That's why I love ghosts. There's many different ways you can go with it. I love the idea of cemeteries and them being lonely. I've seen lonelier cemeteries in my lifetime, and I try to impart that loneliness, that desolation, and just imagining kind of like an old cliche bad horror movie, or comedy where you see the ghost coming out of the grave, on Halloween, and they're all dancing, you know, and that's where they belong, in that graveyard. They're not going to leave the graveyard because that was their final resting place. And they're still here and allowed from heaven or from hell to come back and give us a little spook. We don't know. Anyways, I saw the other day someone doing their poetry, which was more prose than anything, and the guy had an English accent, and it was nice. It sounded nice. Prose. I'm a literalist. When I do poetry, I like rhyme and verse. I don't want to be too difficult, but I can make complicated rhyme and verse, and I'm skilled doing that. And I work on it to be more precise, to be more in depth, to be more deep, um, and be a tongue twister of sorts that's enjoyable. And sometimes we have to work on it. Like I said, poetry is not my best game. So I saw that he was doing prose, and he basically did a link and clip of his prose to one of my poems I posted on a regular, not comment, a regular thread, wall, posting my usual stuff, somewhat for publicity, somewhat for advertising. And it might be in the disappeared when the disappeared is finally all looked at and assembled, codified, spread out nicely, where there's poetry in between my short horror stories that I believe are really good. They were done over a 10-year period, part of which I was homeless and I had nothing else to do except write sometimes with my inspiration, my education, my on the job experience, so to speak, the morbid stuff I've seen in my lifetime as a police officer when being homeless, working in the field I am now, where occasionally we might be called to try to save somebody if the worst occurs, bad accident or something medical related. And I'm not in a morbid place in my life, but I do love delving into that with that inspiration that comes to me. And I'll go there, but it's not so personal that I can't agree with it. I can't accept it. It's not even therapy per se. People say, "Oh yeah, right for therapy." It's not even therapy per se, but it's just inspiration. And when I hit the mark, I feel better. If that makes sense. Most authors know what they mean by that. When they hit the mark and their niche is dead on, and it's like, okay, well, just because I haven't been picked up by contract yet, and I am a critic of the writing field because of how I've been treated like a second class citizen, and I'm the one with the product, but I have to pay someone else to make them money and advertise my work to make them more money in their publisher and print on demand business. And I shake my head. I'm like, no, I'm not that vain that I need to go to the vanities and print everything I've ever done. And so I'll wait another 10, 15 years and I'll put together a 700, $800, 800 page, mega biblion. And someone can judge then how good it really was and know it's worth something. And it is the best that P. Francis McNichol have written. And this poetry I'm going to do tonight is not necessarily advertising. It was just trying something different. I don't speak the best. That's why I love authoring. I come from a large family and we yelled at each other a lot, so to speak. But I love English being perfect, the right place, the right time, the right words, the right consonants, everything put together, the right thought where you don't have voice and someone can read it years later. And that's in essence why I love writing. I like to put a thought down and I know it's there and I'm pulling it out and I can keep on going there for different thoughts. With poetry, it's a little harder because you have a more condensed time and all these words are flowing through my brain and they're always there. I'm thinking of during the day and it pops out on me. And I've heard that word before and I've used that word before. Can I use it here? And so I start doing a deep dive and research into even more words based on it just being heard one time 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So, doing this poem today, I'm reciting it. I'm not always into recitation. I'm not always into advertising everything I do because I want it to be in one complete book. When an actual house, publishing house, wants to buy my work and give me my just desserts, I want them to know that they have it, they're in charge, print it nicely in a book. It's all yours. Okay. But I want it to be nice. I want it to be legible. I want it to make sense. And so all these different words come out, and I'm like, I always love cemeteries. And then I always had this picture of the leprechaun in the leprechaun movies that were horrible. And I have a picture of the cemetery being lonely, and there's one steward there sitting there on top of a gravestone, and he's monitoring the humans and the live people walking in the cemetery, making sure they don't disrespect the cemetery and their desolate, isolated, eerie surroundings. And so this one gentleman that did his poem or his actual prose had an English accent, and I was like, oh, well, it's funny you did that because I did a poem more recently, a few days ago, and it's called "Me Claim to Me Lot." I think of the Irish and I think of their accent in different locations in Ireland where they have different accents. And some of them are very guttural. If you don't know what you're listening to, you have to really pay attention and look at their lips while they're speaking. You're like, oh, what did you say? And so I kind of put myself in a mindset of an old Irishman. I am Irish myself, but I don't have an accent and I don't speak the best all the time publicly. I know that. That's why I love authoring also. So this little treat is going to be Me Claim to Me Lot tonight, and I'm going to try to read it nicely as best I can. I read it earlier in an earlier video, and I just didn't like the video, especially um, trying to enunciate with some baka in my lip, so to speak. So here is my rendition of Me Claim to Me Lot by P. Francis McNichol. Me claim to me lot. You say me crypt is evil. You say I must obey. Evildoers amongst the stone, in the sunlight, in the dusk, and of the rotten craven. Be still and say not a word, where the crow calls alone. And treat the smelly ripe, and trail sinew stitched, it shed off the bones. Peace it dwells, calling out the pipes, never reaping should it see the light of beck and day, with putrescence of the dead, bathing in our basking tripe, and rout our hell-born ways. I'm sorry, hell bound ways, where the dead I do decree. Walk around me grave, never touch me awarded stone, and run, don't walk, always so naive, all the afraid and bloody baden, to your ablaze refugium home. So, tongue twister, and I love it, and I love the way it rhymes. I try to use other words that are not always the same everyday words, like the day. You have baden, you have craven, you have other words, ablaze, um, that are tongue twisters in themselves with some sentence structure. And I try to capture that in this poem because those words, they come there, they're lingering. Everybody has probably heard the words, even people who don't like writing English or reading it, but they speak English. They've heard a lot of different words that they're like, yeah, they understand what the meaning is at the time. They might not have given it much thought, but it was something that they were definitely aware of, and they might want to incorporate it one day into some of their literature that they author. So that was just me claim to me lot, and I loved it. I loved writing it the other day, and though I don't have an English accent right now, uh, I don't think I'm going to develop one anytime soon. I just thought it was interesting to do me claim to me lot, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you, and please have a great day out there. Take care.